After leading by as many as 10 points in Game 4, the Pacers were outscored 31-17 in the fourth quarter. For a team that was previously 9-1 in clutch games throughout the playoffs, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander out-clutched the Pacers all by himself over the final 5 minutes, whereas the Pacers struggled to regain traction while screening SGA into action. SGA relentlessly searched for and found friction while operating as the screener to finagle more favorable matchups, and what led to a series of changes that changed the series from a potential 3-1 lead for the Pacers to a 2-2 split. Joining me to discuss that, along with other trends and notables from Game 4, is once again Samson Folk, who co-hosts this podcast with Caitlin Clark.
Yeah, big, very, very excited. You know, it is kind of funny there under that tweet that I made. John Hollinger was like, no, not Caitlin Clark, the famous one. And I tell you what, walking around Indianapolis with Caitlin Cooper will make you think that maybe she is the famous Caitlin. Everyone is so excited to see her, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, I love your work." And that was maybe the coolest thing about going around there, was kind of seeing how you are in your place of being and how appreciated you are there. It was cool.
I always appreciate Indiana. I appreciate the fans that appreciate watching this show. And that's a lot of uses of the word appreciation. Some things that perhaps weren't to be appreciated in the fourth quarter. You were there live. I was there live. Your impressions. What did you think the Pacers were going to hold on to the 10-point lead? What were you thinking when they went into the fourth quarter?
I thought they were going to win that game. I was pretty confident about it, especially when everything was kind of gummed up and Tyrese shook loose for a couple drives. I was like, this will stave them or stave off the Thunder so that they can get back to their process and close this game out. Like, they got through the tough part of the game. Only that tough aspect of scoring and, relying on beating switches, relying on going to the isolation, that was sustained by the Pacers, and the Thunder kept the ball out in front, and they played great catch up when the ball did get passed. And they're, like the Pacers, there wasn't all that much cutting. It's just like everything got super bogged down. And on the other end, I mean, the 7 points in 3 possessions that Shai had with the 2 free throws, the made bucket, that step back with the little forearm shiver, step back, collect yourself against Neesmith, and then the catch and shoot 3 to take the lead. I was like, oof, because that buffer was gone just in an instant. And the Pacers, the Thunder lost one that they definitely shouldn't have lost. The Pacers lost one that they definitely shouldn't have lost. But these are two teams that are extremely close to one another. These are two teams that are playing extremely high-level basketball. And I'm really interested to see how the next 3 games go, or I guess it could be 2, but these teams are playing really high-level basketball with a lot of chess match stuff going on. However, I think the end of that game for the Pacers did not involve much chess. More so checkers type of process, I think.
I think to an extent, though, that a lot of times throughout the entirety of these playoffs, and especially because of how some of the games for the Pacers have gone, that a lot of this is getting billed as one team having some epic collapse and being a failure, rather than sometimes crediting what the other team did to win the game and what adjustments they made or what Shai was doing in the fourth quarter that made a difference. So it's going to be an even balance of both for us, at least, I think, over the course of this podcast. I think I want to credit winners and also maybe point out some things that maybe could be improvement areas for the Pacers, or that maybe they want to tweak in response to some of what the Thunder did in the fourth quarter. So I guess what the plan is here is just to kind of run down what I thought popped as maybe some recurrent issues or perhaps prevailing questions from the end of that frame. So the big one, which I will throw to you first, is did you think there was an argument for closing this out with Obi Toppin at the 5 instead of Miles Turner? For reference for everybody, just before that you answer that, Miles came in at the 221 mark for Obi to play with the rest of the starters. He did play with the rest of the starters for a little bit before Obi ended up coming back in with like less than 30 seconds to play.
Yeah, I would have liked to see them close with Obi. I understand, and not to be too harsh on Miles because he was clearly dealing with stuff over the 2 games in Indy. However, I think there would have been opportunities when the ball did get pinged around that Obi could have driven like a closeout, would have been able to get downhill. That stuff probably would have been more feasible for the Pacers. And Miles, we've seen it the last couple of games as he's not been able to make shots. A lot of that stuff has been kind of like catch, sidestep around above the break. And when they're running, like, it's not exactly triangle concepts, but when they're running the really high up, like handoff sequences or pitch play sequences, like his decision making hasn't been super incredible there either. So Obi, I think, could have added or helped with dynamism closing. And the Pacers didn't get stops on defense anyway. So, I mean, I probably would have been okay with it, honestly.
So let's look at it from both sides. A lot of the things that you pointed out there about Miles, I think, popped for me as well. After the Game 3 podcast, you and I talked about some of, the quote-unquote solves that they found with both Tyrese and Pascal Siakam, one of them being that the Pacers ran Tyrese off of a lot more handoffs rather than just high screen and roll to get him a running start, to help him get into the paint more often in Game 3. They still wanted to go to that in this game. And I will say, for people listening right off the top, I know that the officiating was a big talking point after this game. Samson and I have a bit of an embargo on ref talk. It doesn't interest me, because if I'm going to point out what I think were some missed calls in the fourth quarter or throughout the game, then I'm going to have to sit here and literally talk over the top of every call that was made or wasn't made. And like, being a ref analyst to me is about as miserable as relying on refs to win games. That being said, when I run this clip, I'm not going to completely ignore what happened here, but I am also going to point out what could have happened to avoid what happened, if that makes sense. So, the Pacers have 2 minutes to play here. They're down by a point. They want to be running the handoff stuff between Miles and Tyrese, and I'm just going to run it first. Yes, that was a foul. Like, you can't two-hand shove Tyrese off the handoff route and then get a steal. That was a critical non-call. That doesn't mean there were no other non-calls or missed calls throughout the whole game, but I'm not going to ignore that. I agree with the populace. That was a foul. However, Miles in handoff situations, some of what they were doing in Game 3 when I showed the clip packages, a lot of them were more so a get action, where Tyrese is skipping it to Miles, and Miles basically just has to stand there stationary and hand it right back to Tyrese. And this game throughout, but especially in the fourth quarter, the Thunder were pretty aggressive at pressuring a lot more of those actions. Even when Tyrese tried to skip earlier in the game, they were pushing the guy who was the handoff operator off that mark. So when Miles has to actually be in motion as a handoff operator, this is something that has been, somewhat of a weak spot over his career in creating advantages as a handoff operator, because there is actually an art to forcing overs and creating advantages when you're doing that. So like, when you're watching him here, he needs to actually dribble at Lu Dort and create some semblance of contact here. Or even better yet, when he gets off the ball, use a lateral 2-foot hop so that he's still cleaning Lu Dort off of Tyrese. That steal probably doesn't happen, because he's probably not going to be in position to make the shove if the handoff was executed a little bit better than that. And this, like I said, this even showed up in the beginning of the first quarter, where you just see stuff with Miles when he's a handoff operator. He gets a little bit jittery, and when he has to change directions, there Shai's able to duck under really easily, which is the common tactic for teams against handoffs when it's east-west, because it's easier to get to the other side, especially when you're that far out from the basket. But there's no change of angle from Miles there. Like, that's a place where when you do hand it off, change so your feet are facing the stanchion and try to pin Shai in so he can't duck under so easily against Andrew and get to the other side. There was a lot of little things that happened like that, but if you want to talk about any of the handoff stuff while I continue to run, there's going to be more stuff from Miles here coming up.
Yeah, and just as an addition for the handoff craft, Sabonis, Pacers fans will be especially familiar with that. Even Thunder fans will be familiar with that. Is ball placement doesn't have to be to a guy's chest either.
Yeah.
Now, Miles, as you point out, a lot of this can be about putting his body on Dort's and kind of making sure that he does that kind of stuff. And just overall, as you say, jittery. When he gets up above the break, he's taking a lot of negative dribbles and looks lost out at sea. But if you do want to be really great at creating space for your lead guards or whoever's coming off these handoffs, an awareness of where in that first clip Caruso was, if Caruso is going to lean back, you can actually place the ball into space for Ty to go out and run into it. And it gives you more space to plant stuff as the screener. it's just handoff craft stuff, and it would have helped late. And it's actually partially why I after game one was like, I maybe would have tried to close with Hartenstein back then. Was because Hartenstein does a lot of that stuff, but obviously Miles does a lot of things that Hartenstein doesn't. And then, anyway, yes, would have liked it to be better.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem is if you do throw it out into space or make the drop-off pass, you really have to trust your ability to stick the defender. Like, because that's one of the things that Sabonis probably does better than anybody in the NBA is he'll literally drop the ball off, and then he just trusts himself that he's going to pin the guy to get the handoff. A lot of times, like I said, with Miles, he wants to get off the ball very quickly, and then he doesn't adjust the screen with the lateral 2-foot hop after getting off the ball to ensure that the defender is actually going to be peeled off. So the Thunder took a little bit of advantage of that. And then there was also some stuff in the fourth quarter too, where rebounding, like these aren't exciting highlights. And I don't mean necessarily for this to be all lowlights, but it is just kind of speaking to Rick said after game 3 that Miles had been dealing with some illness. He wasn't questionable for this game. He played, but like from an energy standpoint, it just seemed fairly often, especially in the fourth quarter, that he actually wasn't getting exactly where he needed to be at the right time in the right place. And then the other thing with the split actions, because we talked about that after game 3 as well, that in addition to the handoffs for Tyrese, they tried to run a lot of split and flash game with the big going up to, in between, ideally, the 3-point line in the elbow area to be setting that. A lot of these were getting pushed very high outside above the break, and then it was easy for Chet to be switching, which I actually think Tyrese does draw a foul on this particular one. But that was another thing that stood out, that like you need to not allow the big to be pushing you up the line when you're trying to go to get into the splits. And then just as a contrast too, this is the actual sideline out of bounds play that the Pacers ran for Tyrese at the end of game 2 when you and I both were like, hey, yes, it was garbage time, but some of these things actually did work for Tyrese to get downhill. So they were, it's a get action again. Tyrese is throwing it ahead so that they can go into stack. The Thunder made an adjustment against this play where they've switched the ball screen. Now they're going to switch the stack screen, and they're just not getting a lot with Miles against those switches in the paint, neither on the glass nor potentially feeding it to him there. And then this one, I don't know what you thought of this, Samson, but there are so many questionable things going on in this possession. So Tyrese skips it to Miles to go into basically another pitch. And I think what they were attempting to do here is that Miles wanted to screen away for Tyrese to go back to the ball. I think that's the most charitable way that I can look at this. But in essence, Miles almost becomes the on-ball defender on Andrew Nembhard. And then after setting this screen for Nembhard, Miles gets Shai on him, doesn't do anything about that until Nembhard has to create for mid-range against Chet. And so, like, it just really makes me question what exactly, like, that is a very messy possession to have in the fourth quarter of the NBA Finals. Similarly here, like, he's getting the switches against Shai. It ends up being a lot more perimeter-oriented. Right here, like, that's a great opportunity for a quick swim move. Like, get right in front of Shai and seal him. Instead, he chooses to release out to the 3-point line. And then, like, what you mentioned before, it's a sidestep to the left 3. Like, there just wasn't a lot of trying to leverage anything in the interior for him. He was slow to rebounds. The handoff stuff didn't go very well. And so I can't say how he's feeling in his body. That's for him to say. And I certainly want to be respectful of that. But at a certain point in time, I would have probably tilted more towards, hey, Obi has it somewhat going offensively here. I probably would have just tried to go small. And despite the fact that the Thunder, I think, scored like 7 of 9 shots at the rim when Obi was out there at the 5, as you mentioned, they really weren't getting stops at the end of the fourth quarter anyways.
Yeah. Well, also, like, Obi was part of a good defensive stand at the end of game 3 as well. Like, he hung in, and while credit goes to the guards, like when Tyrese answered my question about, guarding at the level, he made sure, like, well, when Nembhard is the guy on ball, it simplifies a lot of stuff for other people. But there was a bit of a blueprint, I think, that they could have gone to that had worked in the past that they didn't. And Miles had it's just not a good game. Them's the breaks. And he certainly didn't have the defensive punch at the end of game 4 that he found at the end of game 3.
course, the other side of this is like what happens if you do play Obi at the 5, and something
Mhm.
else like I didn't point out at the beginning of this, which is probably remiss on my part, is that the Thunder did make an overall lineup change. They did start double big in this one. I think mostly as a counter for the pressure that was being applied to Shai, because they wanted to be using Hartenstein to set more screens to try to effectively relieve that pressure with better screen craft, as you mentioned. So, as it turns out, after everybody kind of talked about that after game 1, the Thunder did not win the double big minutes,
Yeah.
and they also did not come close to winning the minutes when it was just Hartenstein, but they were much more successful when it was just Holmgren after all. But something that stood out because of some of the lineup changes is that when Obi was out there on the floor, especially with Miles, Obi was the person being guarded by the 5s, and Miles was the person being guarded by Jalen Williams or Kenrich Williams. And also when Obi was on the floor with Siakam, Siakam was being guarded by Jalen Williams or sometimes Chet predominantly. Of course, I think on the surface, looking at that matchup, like one of those players is much more accustomed and effective at being defended by 4s or smalls than the other player is. So that kind of points more in the direction again of like if you had gone to Obi late in the game, most likely Chet probably would have guarded Obi because that was the pattern throughout the prior game, and then Siakam still would have just been guarded by 4s as he was. So that wouldn't necessarily changed anything whether Obi or Miles was out there. But just some quick clips of Obi being guarded at the 5 spot. Before, when I was talking about some of the stuff with Miles and the get actions, this is the same 77 skip action. You can see how much more aggressive the Thunder were being at pressuring it, even when Obi was out there. And then something that you have to consider, like I said, if Obi's going to be guarded by 5s, I believe statistically he set 19 picks in this game, which would be tied for his most in any of this entire postseason run because he was guarded by the 5 so much. And I don't know about how you feel about Obi as the screener, but I don't think all of this was necessarily the ideal outcome. The Pacers didn't score particularly efficiently when he ended up needing to be the screener. But I suppose this will get to a topic that we talk about later, that if Obi was out there and being defended by the 5, perhaps you could have looked at some other modes of entry with Siakam rather than continuing to, involve Chet as the screener as much as they did. But they actually did reach a point where briefly in the first half, right here, you'll see that they went to a lineup that they rarely play, but that used to start often, where they actually tried Aaron Nesmith at the 4 just to try to get the 5 back onto Miles. There was like a brief 3-minute stretch in the first half where they went to that just so that Miles could be back being a screener with the 5 defending, and the Thunder were still switching. I really don't know why Tyrese picked his dribble up that
Yeah.
high with Hartenstein switching out, but
He's gotten himself into trouble like maybe like 8 or 9 times in the series so far with
picking
that
the dribble
dribble
up too
pickup.
quick.
Yeah. But I mean, it's tough against these Thunder. Like they'll punish things that you maybe don't expect them to. But yeah,
Something that I like, though, like if it was going to be Obi and Siakam, which the Pacers didn't win the minutes when Obi and Siakam were out here, but allowing Siakam to be the bring up ball handler more, and then if Obi is going to be guarded by the 5 spot, him coming up and setting that flare for Tyrese and allowing Siakam to operate a little bit more from the middle of the floor, I think perhaps would have been fruitful for them late in the game, because there you can see the split action getting pushed way up the line again whenever Obi's involved with it. But these are some considerations. Then, I don't really mean for it to be a Miles low light, but he tried to jam himself in there against some of the cross matches and some really unideal places as well that kind of spoiled what some of the spacing would have been on the drives. And then to your point, when you said that Toppin hung in on the one possession that you mentioned, like he hung in here too. Like he got switched on to Jalen Williams late in the clock, and he at least used his length decently, and then ended up getting this block at the top of the key. So perhaps they could have, I don't know that you can always rely on Obi switching out in late game situations, but there was a highlight there, and then there was some times where Obi crashed the corner while he was being defended at the 5 when help had to come. And, that is a little bit more dynamic than what you're going to get from Miles in those situations as well. And then just one last thing that I liked from him is that even if when he was the screener, and although it wasn't the most efficient thing that the Pacers were doing, he did actually look to, hey, a small guy's guarding me. I could perhaps, also make an impact on the offensive glass. So I guess those are the thoughts between. It's kind of been a back and forth in all these games in terms of who they're going to be closing with. But I think broad strokes, my thought is from what I've seen there, Some of this goes back to Miles needing to do some things that's never been perhaps his greatest strength, but also I don't think he was completely at full strength, and probably taking a chance on playing the smaller unit and hoping that you can outscore your opponent.
Yeah. Like I said at the top, I would have liked to see Obi, but them's the breaks. I mean, game 4 is done and dusted.
The next thing that we're going to shift over to is basically Pascal Siakam and Obi Toppin to an extent. Siakam attempted one shot in the entire fourth quarter, which was a three-pointer. He had 8 total touches in the fourth quarter, which, for a frame of reference, less than Tyrese, who had 33 touches, Nembhard, who had 26 touches, Nesmith, who had 17 touches, Miles Turner, who had 13 touches, and tied with TJ McConnell, who also had 8 touches. So, what do you think was some of the rationale for why some of the things that we saw that worked for Siakam in game 3, or at least that I thought that worked for Siakam in game 3, in terms of shifting him a little bit more to the nail, getting him touches there for cleaner entry, running some of the split action with Siakam out of the elbows, sometimes even just getting him like isolation touches at the elbows and doing some of the inverted spacing that was optimized for him that they didn't necessarily get to that in the fourth quarter. And it felt like they missed opportunities with Obi and Siakam quite a few times to me in the fourth quarter as well.
Yeah, largely, if I'm stepping into the Pacers' shoes, I think I'm looking at J-Dub is Pascal's defender, and we want to keep him out of actions. That's like a meaningful reason why they might go to other things. Like when they are running stuff between Nembhard and Nesmith, it's like, well, obviously they're probably hunting something here then, and Pascal isn't involved in that. He was a little bit himself stagnant, like when he was spaced out. Maybe there were a couple opportunities for cuts, but he did corner crash every time, and like he was hunting the rebound. He just unfortunately wasn't able to get any. So there's that stuff too. But I would have liked to see something inverted, and Pascal has this unique ability in this series, and maybe against the Thunder of any of their major matchups, he doesn't turn the ball over. It's pretty meaningful. Like, you're getting a shot, you're getting a look, and especially with that like tug throw ahead dribble that he has across his body, he's been able to get in the teeth of that defense quite often. And I I just would have liked to see him get the ball a lot, and I would have liked him featured. And it doesn't have to be repeatedly because maybe he wouldn't have the stamina to go at it like nonstop. But I was surprised by how little he was involved, even if he does have like Jalen Williams on him, even if we have seen the Pacers go to other things because they're like, we want to keep Dean Wade out of the action. So Pascal's here. It's I understand they trusted Tyrese and they flattened out and they were like, we'll see what happens here. But them's the breaks, I guess.
I actually thought that Siakam and Obi were both pretty active at their normal early work, trying to get seals against what mismatches there were in the fourth quarter. However, they weren't always seen. Aaron ends up hoisting that because TJ didn't see Siakam getting that early seal. Likewise with Obi, I should say. Obi once again guarded by the 5 in the fourth quarter in minutes with Siakam. He sets the screen for TJ. He gets the switch and he does a good job there of, screen below, stay below, and actually hit and hold so that he could get that switch on his back. He seals again, puts the hand out, reverse. And this is where, like what you just said about, Siakam wasn't always the most active when he was off ball. Like in this case, there were minutes in the fourth quarter where he wasn't being guarded by Jalen Williams either. Like this is Kenrich. And to me, like if Obi has that mismatch, I really want to see Siakam flashing to the high paint here because it's going to be very hard for TJ to enter when he's being guarded by Chet Holmgren on the perimeter. That's a lot of length to have to pass around. Siakam could potentially throw it to Obi, or in my latest harebrained idea that I would like to see more NBA teams doing is I almost wish that TJ would have just shot the ball here. Even if TJ doesn't make it, who else is going to get the rebound most likely than Obi Toppin? Like when teams front mismatches, I think there's a lot of opportunity to either be doing, throw it off the backboard so the big can just get it, or just to go ahead and shoot it, because more likely than not, he's going to get the rebound in that situation.
LaMelo Ball will spearhead this revolution.
I really want LaMelo or Tyrese to be the person that brings this to the NBA. I think somebody told me that Chris Paul actually did once try that. But it's the same thing with Siakam. Like, feel free to tell me that this is my latest galaxy brain ridiculousness. Although you tend to think positively of the word galaxy brain, but even if Siakam flashes and he could throw it off the backboard, Obi's going to get it. Like, there's nobody else for the Thunder that's going to be competitive in that situation. Of course, the placement matters to a certain extent, but if TJ's just flat out shooting it, you at least have the shot of him making the three, and if he misses it, then Obi can get it. But, Siakam didn't actually move, and then this is actually his only shot from the entire fourth quarter was out of that, not being able to feed it
Which
into Obi.
is not such a bad look, honestly, on the possession, but there was just much better things. I will say, if there is, to revert back to your Galaxy Brain take, it would require somebody who has almost zero inhibitions on a basketball court. They would have to be so unafraid of public perception that they're like, yes, because you run the risk of being Javal McGee, like made into a lol cow of some sort if you do these types of things. And
Tyrese isn't afraid to use the backboard as a passer, though. He's done it multiple times.
Yeah.
Like, for how often Obi and Siakam get seals or will sometimes be fronted, I think the opportunities are there for the backboard to be their friend, personally. But
I'd love to see it. I'd love to see that.
Tyrese, if you're listening, make this happen. The thing that the Pacers were looking at frequently in the fourth quarter is they wanted to get Shai as the on-ball defender. So Nesmith was being used as a screener a lot so that they could get Shai. Here, TJ does his normal TJ-nish and Nash is under the basket and brings Shai back up to the top of the key. And then it was always get Shai on ball, and then they were following it with a screen from Chet Holmgren. And in defense of the Pacers, I think the thought process there was similar to the prior two rounds. Like, we in part want to guard Shai by forcing him to guard, so we're going to involve him as much as possible. Also, it's not like the Thunder have a lot of weak links out there in most of their lineups defensively. And thirdly, Chet was somewhat hobbled earlier in this game, and there were times throughout the second half where it didn't look like he was moving 100%. So that might have gone into some of the thought process here, although that didn't actually, lean in their favor against some of the switches that they were going to. But in this case, you can see, again, I don't really know why Nembhard reversed that back up to TJ at the top of the key to try to enter it to Obi when Obi has strong position against Shai. So I felt like, number one, a missed opportunity with Obi and especially Siakam was with some of the seals in the fourth quarter, but then also the change overall, which I lightly talked about before, with the split actions, where too much of the time, whether it was Miles or Obi running the splits, they were pushed way too far above the break when ideally you want to be initiating those a lot closer to the elbow. And I think a lot of it had to do with the physicality in the run up on the flash to go get the ball from the Thunder, which was clearly a very, slight adjustment. And again, that's the spoiled spacing from Miles, where that might have turned out better if he hadn't tried to insert himself against the cross match. Clearly not the shot that you want to end the clock with. But like here again, like look, almost every one of these split actions, if you pay attention, the big split is on either the NBA Finals projected logo there or the Gamebridge logo. And in Game 3, when they were running these with Siakam, that was never the case. His foot was either at the elbow or in between the elbow and the three-point line. Like, the highest it was getting was close to the three-point line. Like, look at him here while he's being guarded by Lu Dort, and then he ends up getting fouled because Lu Dort hangs on to him. Siakam did a better job in Game 3 of keeping those touches closer to the elbow, despite some of the physicality. And of course, the Thunder also upped the physicality. But those were two things that I thought stood out to me, was that naturally there were more places to already get them involved. The ball just didn't get to them. And then in the ways where the ball did get to them in Game 3, more of those touches were being filtered to Miles and Obi because of who was guarding them. Whereas, and we're going to see this with what Oklahoma City did, sometimes I think that even regardless of what the matchups are, there's not a lot of weak links for OKC anyways. I think I'd rather just see the max player being involved rather than only attempting one shot in the fourth quarter and only getting 8 touches.
Yeah. Shai is not Donovan Mitchell. The hunting looks different. But like I talked about the same thing. I was like, I would have liked to see like inverted ball handling with Pascal, or when they're running the split action stuff on the podcast wherein you were referred to as Caitlin Clark. And yeah. So I really like watching Pascal. I think he's a tremendous basketball player. I was a bit crestfallen to see that he wasn't looked at as a solve down the stretch. And yeah, I think we're We're pretty close on that, but I'm excited for how you segue out of this one.
I actually easily can, because as I hinted towards, the Thunder did not have reservations about running actions between their two top star
Yes.
players being SGA and J-Dub, despite the fact that they were being guarded by Indiana's, I mean, some people might have debates. I think that the two top defenders for the Pacers are probably Nesmith and Nembhard. Pascal has a case in certain situations because of the different roles that he plays and the many different things that he's asked to do. So whatever you think there, not trying to cause a
Probably,
controversy.
I'm in the comments. I'd like to rank the top 3 defenders of the Pacers, but don't be rude about it. But I think probably since Nesmith had his ankle injury, Pascal's probably been better in the stretch since then. But that's
Right.
injury, you know. That's like
Right. And I would say that, like, this is actually kind of a fun talking point.
this
Is
is
that,
one of our earlier, you know,
yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah, because Siakam gets asked to do more things than Nesmith does, and Siakam props up a lot of the defense because of that. And also some of the impact numbers look better because Siakam's on the floor and Obi isn't. And like Obi's a bigger drop off player position wise than what's the case with Aaron sometimes. I think that Aaron has more matchup versatility a bit than Siakam, although I think that Siakam's shown more with that throughout this playoff run. And that if you needed somebody to do that against a top matchup for 10 straight minutes, I would rely in Aaron in those situations a little bit more than Pascal. But I honestly think that you could rank either of them top
I
2 if
think
you wanted to.
the finals is featured, I think, 4 guys who are giving like roughly like all defensive level performances: Nembhard, Pascal, J-Dub, and Dort. And I think all those guys are playing out of their minds on defense.
But point being is, Nesmith's guarding Jalen Williams. Nembhard's been guarding Shai Gilgeous, because most of that's going to Nembhard because there's not a lot of other clear answers for that particular matchup. Nembhard did, I thought, quite well against Shai in the prior game. In this game, though, as we just said, the Pacers weren't exactly running a lot of stuff between Tyrese and Siakam because of what some of the matchups were. The Thunder did not shy away from running stuff between Shai and Jalen Williams, despite the fact that they were opposite of 2 of the top 3 defensive players for the Pacers. So I thought one of the smartest adjustments that the Thunder made, quite frankly, which the Pacers will have to decide how they want to respond to in Game 5, is that Shai, over the prior in games 1, 2, and 3, had only set 1 total screen for Jalen Williams as the ball handler. And this game alone, he set 7, and that was fairly frequent in the fourth quarter where those possessions were coming from. And overall, Shai played off ball a little bit more, because I believe, if I look it up, Dub finished with more total touch time than Shai in this game, more touches than Shai in this game. And his touch time, which was close to 7 minutes, was his second highest of any game for the Thunder this season. So by shifting that away, while Shai was being guarded by Nembhard, and then he was going to go screen and set those flat screens for J-Dub, clear up high once again at the logo where the Pacers want to go over a lot. Andrew's pretty much playing in drop here, and then they're going to a veer back switch. So they've succeeded at what they're wanting here, which is to get Nembhard off of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and then they're entering it right back to Shai against Nesmith. And it's not because Nesmith, as we pointed out, isn't a good one-on-one defender in the right matchups. But for people who may want to know, there were 68 players in the playoffs so far this year with 200 minutes played, and Nesmith ranks 67th in shooting fouls per 100 possessions committed. Second to last, with the last player being Mitchell Robinson. So from the Thunder standpoint, if they can get Nembhard off of Shai while also running action between their 2 best players, and then you're getting somebody who, for lack of better terms, has kind of been a foul machine in the playoffs against one of the players who's been the very best at drawing fouls in the playoffs, you wouldn't often think that a team would hunt Aaron Nesmith, but there kind of was reason for the Thunder to hunt Aaron Nesmith.
Yeah. This is what I talked about, in our preview. I'm pretty sure it was that, there's room to think about Nesmith playing SGA and playing him well because of how he defends. But I couched it by saying it would require a swallowed whistle and like a very like, hey, we're not calling much. Boys will be boys. Let them play type of thing. And that has not been the case for Mr. Nesmith in these playoffs. So, yeah.
So to look at the film, Neesmith does end up foul there after they had done, the veer back switch between the two of them. Once again, the screen, that's just a straight out step up switch with Nembhard. They're going to enter it right back to Shai again. Nembhard tries the double. I think that's the right move. Bluffs in between, gets back out to J-Dub. Then I question why Aaron felt like he needed to sag off and help here, one pass away from Shai. That's just a little bit of a questionable defensive focus mistake for me. And then another matchup between Aaron and Shai where he ends up, so slithery, gets another foul from Aaron. Aaron picked up 3 fouls just in the fourth quarter, and then he ended up fouling out, which I do not plan. I do not have the clips of what happened during the Benedict Mathurin minutes at the end of this game, but the Benedict Mathurin minutes, I think everybody knows we're not good at the end of this game, and what ended up kind of unleashing that and why it occurred. I don't think they ever had any intent of playing Ben with the closing lineup in this game. The only reason they did is because Aaron fouled out. So I guess looking at this, how do you think that the Pacers will adjust to that? Because I think we're going to see more of Shai as the screener as the season as the series progresses based off what we just saw.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we saw Nembhard play off of J-Dub, and they might ask J-Dub to be more of a pull-up artist a little bit. They might just instead of because as you say, the drop in the veer back switch, they could do that. But I mean, you could just
So you're saying
you could just have pass. I don't know. Pascal could step up a little bit higher. You could kind of shift the defense that way. And Neesmith is really good at getting through screens. I think I'm going to play it like this.
Okay.
I'm not switching.
I'm interested.
I'm not veer back switching. Shai, over the course, if they're going to do this works the exact same way to me as it does on the other end. If you're going to make Shai screen nonstop, Neesmith is going to run through him repeatedly. And I think that's just what you do, honestly. And you try and play chalk a little bit. That's probably how I set up that, because I really don't want to keep surrendering that, because you could lose Neesmith. He could be fouled out earlier in the game if the Thunder want to go to this repeatedly throughout instead of just a little bit late.
Just for the listener, you're saying if I run this back, just explain to me over the top what you're wanting Aaron to do.
I want a hedge and recover. I don't want Nembhard.
So you don't want Nembhard dropped back. You want him up, and then you want to hedge it so that you can maintain the matchups.
And I want them wrestling up there, because again, this is the thing, is the Thunder aren't afraid to go wrestle up top against the Pacers on the other side of the floor, and it creates it's great. And they have to fight through it constantly. I like having, especially as Nembhard and Neesmith, I like having them up there aggressive, playing like that. And honestly, that's been a recipe for success for stints in the defense for the Pacers in the past. And just trusting guys in Tyrese and Pascal and Obi to a lesser extent, but still cover the space and see what happens. Because again, this was a team that was at 1 for 12 from downtown. They've had one good 3-point shooting game in the series so far. Have it be that. I think that's probably where I'd keep it, instead of allowing that switch. That what is a stylistic mismatch, maybe.
Interesting question. Would you be at all worried if Nembhard stepped up and took, did a quick show that Shai might slip out to the middle of the floor?
It could happen, but I would think Shai's proclivity as a player would be not that often.
You think he'd slip out to 3?
I think he would. He's not a short roll big, Maybe and maybe that's an adjustment you make after.
He's not, but sometimes Ben Shepherd transforms into a short roller on the fly.
That's at the risk of,
This is actually a pretty fascinating talking point, because I kind of agree with you. I think that his natural inclination would probably be just to slip out into space at 3. But the Thunder would be in a pretty strong position if he didn't. If he did short roll to the free throw line area, then he's just back in his office again. and then you have an odd man advantage with him there.
Yeah, I think probably he's going to slip. I don't think he's going to roll. And I think you can get away with this look, what I'm proposing, for a time. And then the first time he rolls, then it's dead. Then you start mixing and matching again. But I think you could probably get a proclivity thing here. I think you could play off of a tendency and nullify stuff for a handful of possessions, probably.
Yeah, I think I would either go hedge and recover and see how the Thunder respond to it, or I would continue to play it as is and just be more reliant on Nesmith to get through the screen and get back to the ball rather than actually going to the veer back switch and defending it 2-on-2. I think I would be, despite how well Jalen Williams played in this game, I think I would be more comfortable trusting the background rotations behind, waiting for Aaron to get back in front than I would be with continuing to give up the switch, because I think it's just going to get Aaron into too much foul trouble over the course of the series, and I think he's too important to be able to keep him on the floor to just be giving up the switch between Shai and Aaron Nesmith. And I have to imagine that moving forward, that the Pacers are going to make some sort of tweak here, because Aaron, for as many strengths as he has defensively, has for a long time, as I mentioned, not trying to be overly derogatory, he is a foul machine. He doesn't have as much restraint in a lot of situations, and that's why, in part, he was somewhat a better option against Jalen Brunson up until Game 6 when Nembhard was spectacular, because sometimes he's more ambitious with his length. That doesn't serve quite the same purpose in this case against this matchup. But that was one that I thought the Thunder were smart for making that adjustment. And that's probably what I'm going to be keeping my eye on almost about as much as anything as the series moves forward, and to see how much more they will involve him as the screener, obviously, since it was 7 possessions in this game when they literally had only done it once through the first 3 games.
Yeah. They did best on best, and they really reaped the rewards of it. And the Pacers didn't. Yep. And I wonder if the Pacers might ante up for Game 5.
And it does kind of speak to the overall philosophies and ethos of both teams in that regard. Although there have been some possessions, because you and I have showed them, where they've involved Tyrese and Siakam and gotten Siakam at the elbow and spaced Tyrese at the weak side wing to create that wider gap, and they've found success out of it. I don't really know why the Siakam elbow touches completely went away in this one, but I've harped on that enough. Last thing to talk about from the fourth quarter. The Pacers had 9 isolations in the fourth. They only scored 0.5 points per chance out of those. That's the second highest frequency for them in any playoff game this season. Kind of want to look at some of Tyrese's process against what switches they were getting, get your overall impressions on that. Some of this is going to be, I don't want to overly rehash like what some of the other entry points could have been, but once again, they're pointing out, like in this case, Shai was cross-matched onto Nembhard. So they're using Nembhard because they wanted to get Shai on ball. Then they would give it, boomerang pass to get the ball back to Tyrese. And then Siakam's coming up here, and to his credit, being active to set that flare to try to occupy the help while Tyrese has Shai isolated. There's 12 seconds left, and Tyrese takes this shot.
Bad one.
Your reaction, Samson?
Well, from press row, I said, I believe I said, oof. When I saw him pulling up, I was like, and then it got blocked, and I said, oof. And Tyrese is a wonderful reader of the game, and I think this one just tough, not his best decision. But I mean, this is the tough thing about being an NBA star. And especially Tyrese in Game 3 and even earlier in Game 4 is there's some ludicrous pulls. How do you look at Tyrese Halliburton knowing the shots that he's hit and tell him no? Maybe look for something different, which is why it's so important that he's such a reflective, film-loving player, is that he goes and looks and learns. But considering what is in his toolkit, how do you say no to a guy because he's hit this shot? He's hit this shot many times in big moments too. So, but I would have liked to see something different. I feel very brave for saying so. And great defense by SGA as well. That's a very underrated aspect of Game 3 and Game 4 is I just full stop SGA I thought was better. And SGA is a good defender. He's not at the level of Caruso or Dort or J-Dub, and part of that is probably attached to how much he has to give offensively, but he's a good defender. He was a little bit uncharacteristic in game 3, I thought. And game 4, I don't know if it'll be 0.5 like forever, but he's a good defender. He can hang, especially against guards.
Yeah, because while he was used as the screener himself offensively 7 times, he was the screener defender on 17 picks, and the Pacers only scored 0.67 points per chance on those possessions when he was directly involved. I kind of wanted to give people an example because, like, a lot of times when they do get an isolation with Tyrese there, you will see the big, whoever it is, from the short corner step up to set that flare screen. And what they're hoping to achieve, because the Pacers have done this in late game situations for a lot of years now, like, here's the exact same example before they had traded for Pascal. They got the isolation they wanted between Tyrese and James Harden when Harden was still playing in Philadelphia. Miles sneaks up there to set the flare for Buddy Hield. And then if Miles' defender has to help off on a drive, then Miles can collapse directly behind that help and be getting that, which is why the drive portion of it is pretty critical when you get the mismatch. Because you can see if you run that back based on what we just watched, when Siakam sets this, if his defender would have had to collapse on Tyrese, then you could potentially have gotten Siakam cutting right to the rim.
By the
And
way,
so,
clip
yeah.
this for Twitter. What just happened? This is why Caitlin is the best in the world, everybody. Just as a mention, this is why Caitlin is the best in the world. Segue out of that.
Gonna have trouble. That's very hard. Why Miles isn't sealing Shai again? Like there was a lot of opportunities where he had those switches, and to your point, like Siakam's trying to do the corner crash there, but they're not getting it.
He corner crashed on, I think, almost every single flatten out against Chet. When Chet went up to go get stuff, like I think Pascal crashed every single time. Just nothing came of it, unfortunately.
And then this was the one that stood out to me too, because if they weren't trying to get Shai on ball and then going to Chet with the next screen, then it was Tyrese is being face guarded by Lou Dort. They accept that matchup, which the Pacers have had success with Tyrese being face guarded throughout this playoff run. But to me, like, now you're trying to run stuff between Nembhard and Nesmith to try to go get Shai again, but Caruso's fighting through. This is another good compare and contrast. Like, Caruso fights through to maintain that matchup. They don't actually even get Shai where they want him to on this weak side possession with Tyrese out of the action, whereas with the Pacers, Shai was getting the Nesmith matchup that he wanted in the clips that we were showing. And then you have Chet rotating over as the low man anyways, because they didn't do anything to really do any of the help there. So, like, for the Pacers, the process normally was, it was really binary between those two things. It was either Tyrese is being face guarded by Dort, and now we're going to try to move the offense where we're not even necessarily getting the switch that we want, or it's get Shai on ball, bring Chet up to the ball on the switching situation. And some of it, if you're not getting the drive and the feet in the paint, which is why the Pacers say they want to play paint to great so much, there's not enough weak links for the Thunder for the Pacers to really, that's why Shai outscored them by himself 15-7. I mean, sometimes it is about shots going in the basket. Yes. And so when we're pointing out that the Pacers only had this many assists in the fourth quarter, well, you're not going to have a lot of assists when guys don't make shots, but also that I didn't really think that they were necessarily getting the most optimized shots. Cause I mean, to your point, yes, Tyrese is capable of making that shot out on an island against Shai, but I don't know if that's what shot you necessarily want with that amount of time on the clock, given what I know what the other machinations of the offense could have been, and when I've seen them do that in other places in other games.
You want to drive it. I love driving players. They're my favorite players in the world. I love players who drive the basketball. Big fan.
These were the topics that I had from the fourth quarter, and I mainly focused on the fourth quarter because that's kind of when the game was lost for the Pacers, and when, as the title for this podcast is, Shai outclutched them, and there was like a domino effect of changes in the series that could potentially change the series, and wanting to look forward. Hopefully people will see looking forward from this. Many of the things that we talked about that I'll be looking for in game 5. How did the Pacers handle the Thunder playing through their best 2 players again if there's another late game situation? Will the Pacers play through their best 2 players again, regardless of what the defensive matchups are? Because the lineup changes for the Thunder dictated that there were different matchups on the floor depending upon who was out there. Obi guarded by more fives. How will Miles respond in game 5? Hopefully he continues to get healthier or whatever he's dealing with that led to some of the stuff with the handoffs. How can they make the handoffs more effective against the increased pressure from the Thunder, or will they just move away from those given what some of the struggles were from Miles? Those were kind of like my list of things that I'm looking at. But I mean, you and I didn't really get a ton of time to plan this because we both had to get back home and be able to be prepared. So I didn't really get to run past what thoughts you had that maybe you wanted to talk about that I didn't have on the outline.
No, I just we talk about basically everything in the outline, and partially because I love to interject. I don't shut up.
No, I want you to do that. I want you to do that.
I know, I do it, but I have to say it's bad. Oh, why do I do this? But it's good for the podcast. So anyway, I'm really interested to see how going forward, the Pacers typically, after they forget about Pascal, they typically find ways to feature him the next game. Tyrese, I can't remember the last time I saw 2 games in a row where it was kind of like the decision, because what do you have, 5 turnovers, and like 3 or 4 of them sent the Thunder like straight up court on breakaways or like 2-on-1 situations. I can't remember the last time I saw this team kind of struggle so much 2 games in a row with that kind of stuff and not have their own counter. But the same can be said for the Thunder, who their pressure has been so impressive. Their ability to like keep churning has been so impressive. And they're like, I get it. Pacers fans are watching Dort and Caruso largely, like those guys put hands on players.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, if you go after every single Pacers win, Thunder fans are like, we're getting jobbed. We've seen it after every single game is like, every team is like, we got jobbed by the refs. And whether or not it's valid, which maybe it is, maybe it isn't, it's just like there's basketball to look at. And the basketball for the Thunder involves very aggressive defense from Dort and Caruso. They got there playing that way. The Pacers have to beat them playing that way. And that's what's going to keep happening. So I'm very interested to see what type of counters the Pacers go back to kind of navigate that extremely physical, unrelenting pressure, because there are just sequences where they completely lose the plot offensively because of that physicality. And like, to be fair, we've seen Tyrese up his physicality a lot in these playoffs, but he's not going to win that against Dort. It's just good luck. He's a fire hydrant moving around who has grown arms and is like, I'm putting hands on you, man. You're not going to win that. I wonder what they go to, and I hope that it's Pascal. And quite frankly, that wouldn't be new. That would be a return to something that seemingly they left behind a little bit. So that stuff I'm really looking forward to. I think J-Dub and Shai have been unbelievable. I think the continuation of how they're featured, the fact that like the Pacers, when they succeed, there's more going on. They have to outskirt and outwit and kind of like sequence more things together. J-Dub and Shai have been so impressive that it's just like a screen and roll. Can undo everything. Shai, you talked about the touch time. Shai, the fact that like he got to rest and explode at the end of the game was only because J-Dub, not just in that game, but over the course of the series, has taken the high screen and roll and made money out of that, has killed cross matches, and has held up really well on Pascal Siakam. Like, the Thunder Stars are doing the damn thing. And a really underrated aspect of that too is that Caruso got loose again. In game 2, Wiggins and Caruso combined for 38. In game 3, they combined for 8, and Caruso has all 8 of those. I believe Caruso had 20 again in game 4. He also hit a fading mid-ranger that I've not seen him hit before. I was like, damn, okay, that's in the locker for you. But Pacers are up against it. They can, of course, win. In fact, I think they win game 5. But, I mean, these are great teams. I'm having a blast watching this. There's a lot of things that change, but there's also just some like objective strengths. And these are some of the best strengths I've ever seen on a basketball court.
It is also my hope, now that we've completed this and people have seen what I've shown, I hope that your other takeaway is that we don't need to make this completely about which team collapsed on which given night. There were things that the Thunder did better here that countered for things that the Pacers had countered for in the prior game. And the exciting thing about that, which Samson just went into great detail about, is we now get to see how the Pacers are going to counter once again for those counters. Maybe it will be that, hey, let's go watch some film of how Domantas Sabonis creates advantages as a handoff operator. Or perhaps it will be, let's tilt more of the offense into the hands of Pascal Siakam, which seems like a little bit of an easier overnight solve
It
to
would
me
be funny
personally.
if we saw them pressure the J-Dub Shai and Shai splits down the middle immediately. It just makes me look like an idiot.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that, I mean, that kind of speaks to the series, though, right? Like, I think sometimes it's hard. Like, naturally, you might look at that, and that was my inclination of thinking, like, if they hedge that, I wonder if he would just like slip to the nail and then be directly in the place of the floor that he loves to operate from so much. But I don't normally think that that's what happens as your gut reaction, which is why sometimes some of these things are probably looking like a collapse. It's something different. You have to go
Exactly.
back and look at it and react to it. So, to your point, you are likely correct. Like, that's probably not what would happen the first time. But if the Pacers kept doing it, then the Thunder might do that. And then the Pacers might need to adjust it again based on what they were seeing. So that's why I didn't want to completely. And it's not just because it
Yeah.
happened to the Pacers this time. They've been 9-1 in clutch time. They've done this to a lot of other opponents. But a lot of times we've painted it as like, oh, the Knicks choked. Oh, look what the Cavs did. Like, oh, look what the Bucks did. Instead of being like, hey, here's how the Pacers accomplished this. I mean, you and I did that, but I think generally speaking, the inclination is to be like, well, how did this team let that happen? Like, instead of being like, how did this team be able to come back from a 10-point deficit? Like, what changed in the fourth quarter? So that
Shai,
was my goal.
yeah, Shai was unbelievable. Like, we didn't see the clip, but that one, people were calling it a travel. I didn't see a travel there. Like, his feet almost buckled underneath him. He was fading, like almost behind the
Some people have
backboard.
said that he plays like a human octopus or a
Mm.
slinky, depending upon which
Anthropomorphized versions of things.
yeah.
Yes. Um, he, like, the way he absorbed that contact, and yes, he did give Neesmith that forearm shiver, but the forearm shiver is in every star's toolkit, and then collect himself. Like, it was like he was doing a pistol squat almost, and then got his feet under himself, rose up and hit a jumper. And I was just like, man, Pacers might not get this one. And he hit everything down the stretch. And like, not to, like, the Matherin thing we didn't even talk about. That was really unfortunate. I sincerely doubt
And just to
anything
say,
like.
like, I'm not completely ignoring it. I think he would have never been on the floor if not for the fact that Aaron picked up the fouls. And like, there's just no analysis for me to offer to something like that.
Yeah.
Like, he came in, he missed 3 free throws. There were away from the play fouls. There's not really anything super insightful for me to add. It wasn't good. Like,
Yeah.
I will agree with what people said. It wasn't good, but continue.
And on top of that too, I think like that is the kind of stuff that has not happened to the Pacers in their hard charges back to win games. They've sequenced play after play after play after play together, and somehow, like, they're a super aggressive inbounds defense. They got the turnover the very next play. Like, they get, like, that could have been that away from the play thing could have ended up fine because it could have been one and then taking two to get back in. But the performance of it is just like the Pacers haven't had a letdown like that. And that's probably why it seems so disappointing. Is like the Pacers usually manage like some sort of ethereal ability to just, or ethereal ability to kind of make things happen in those situations. And unfortunately, the Matherin fouls and missed free throws just like cut the legs out from under them. And there wasn't even opportunity for magic because everything was a dead ball free throw type play. And then Bob's your uncle, Becky's your aunt. No magic, no Aaron Neesmith. Well, he's off the floor. No Tyrese threes, no nothing. No Nemhard threes, nothing. And I'll tell you what, though, at the end of the game, like, it just looked like the Thunder, for that stretch, they sorted it out, and the Pacers certainly didn't. And hell yeah, 2-2 For the record, I know Pacers fans listening won't be surprised by this, but neutral fans, OKC fans, the citizenry of NBA fans are surprised at this. 2-2 going back to OKC. Everyone is shocked right now. Pacers are better than people thought. This series has been unbelievable. This is, for my money, basketball versus basketball. I don't care about Nielsen ratings. This is the best final series I've watched in an extremely long time. Like, obviously, the Raptors is the best one. That's such a good final series. But this has been unbelievable basketball. Every game, down to the wire. Two coaches, all the players putting their brains together, trying to figure out what the hell are we going to do against these guys? Amorphous blobs of problem solving. And that's just basketball. Unbelievable. Ben Mathurin scored 27 points. It's been insane.
I almost had one of my insecure moments there because as you know, one of my biggest fears is when somebody pronounces a word differently than me, and then my head's like, "Is that really how you pronounce it?" And I've been doing it wrong my whole life.
Yeah, ethereal. Yeah, ethereal.
I didn't know. Like sometimes when people do that, I really think to myself, like, "Is that really how that's pronounced?" And I just didn't know it.
Civ and Sieve is one. What's the other one? It's like panache.
I wouldn't say that. I would say panache.
Panache. Yeah, there's so many of them.
Oh, here's a big one. I want to get your feedback on this one. People use it in basketball a lot. So would you say the next game, Pascal Siakam will be integral to how the Pacers operate in late game situations, or integral to how the Pacers?
Integral.
I would say integral. That's
I usually elongate things. It's just my way. I got that drawl on me. Integral.
Word pronunciations. Okay, well, do you have anything else that you want to? I mean, I think we've summed up this game fairly well. And other thing that I want to apologize to everybody about is like that we took longer to get this one done. We were both in Indy for both 3 and 4. We needed time to get back. I needed time to be able to clip things, and thought I was getting back to a place where there would be more stable internet, but apparently that was wishful thinking. So thank you for sticking with us and listening to this, despite the fact that it's coming out later, and hopefully you can stomach rewatching the fourth quarter if you're a Pacer fan, and hopefully we've given you some optimism to watching Game 5 moving out of Game 4. But I was going to let you have the floor since you are back. You spent your time in Indy. You're back in Toronto now. Any final thoughts and closing thoughts on my beloved Indiana?
So Indiana reminded me of where I grew up, like, a lot. It's it seems very not just in like the shape of it, the bones of the land. It seems very similar to Saskatchewan. But also like Indianapolis largely seems like a city meant for cars, like the little area, the hub is like very walkable, but like the sprawl or whatever, like it just seems like cars. And Saskatchewan cities are built that way too. And like the lack of big, tall buildings, also where I come from, Indianapolis kind of reminded me of I went to university in a city called Saskatoon, which has like 300,000 people. It just reminded me of like a big version of that, but also it has massive buildings called Gainsbridge and Lucas Oil Stadium that Saskatchewan doesn't have in the slightest. The weather was awesome. I liked the heat. The people were really cool. Caitlin and I got stopped nonstop. I'm rehashing the Game 3 thing I said, but because Game 4, like, Indianapolis was the same the next day as it was the day prior, and it was good. And I got to hang out with Caitlin. We got to sit up and eat. I just scarfed endless amounts of chicken and fries. I was so hungry after Game 4. Got to hang out. I got to meet her for the first time in person after being friends for so long. So it was, I mean, what a blast. The best thing about Indianapolis is Caitlin. Is that good?
I was not fishing for that. I was just giving you room to say what you wanted to say as your exit survey. But both of us were quite hungry. I was very hungry by halftime of that game. People know I had to track down Chick-fil-A within Gamebridge twice, and I was going to try to be a nice friend and bring it to you because we didn't get to sit together at either game. But I was worried about my ability to find you on the 200 level, get back to the 100 level because the Chick-fil-A is on the entry level. But luckily, you were still able to find food when the game was over.
Yeah, because of Josh. And Josh said he could hear the cheers like when
Really?
yeah, from the hotel. I was like, that's cool.
That
And
is
that's maybe the thing that will sit in my brain more than any. Actually, let me say something.
okay.
I'm so sorry to Pat McAfee for saying this. If you're trying to amp up a crowd, being like, the money line says, come on, man. Come on. Like, we can do so much. And here's the thing, too. They were trying to queue up the crowd, all the in-stadium stuff. He talked for too long. They had to cut him off. He didn't get to do his whole speech because he's talking about gambling. He's talking about betting lines. Pat, you could do better than this. Surely. I will say, the Welcome to the Jungle drop is a very important feature of every game ops team. The Pacers, the Welcome to the Jungle drop, the Raptors used to be incredible at it. Like the and it has like the in the background, and then the crowd is going nuts. The Pacers, the drop was very good. And the Raptors this year, because they were out of so many games early, they had to do the Welcome to the Jungle drop like in the third quarter sometimes, it felt like. So I was a big fan of that. The crowd was the best I've ever been in. Unbelievable work from Indiana. The basketball is a little different there. Something about 49 states.
Just as my inside perspective on it, because I wanted to give you space to talk about it on the last episode and this one. What I will say is I didn't actually do much in Indy because we had podcasts to record, we had games to go to, and we also I had hotel accommodations to try to arrange and other finding credentials and other just logistical things to do. But I think after 10 years of me covering this basketball team and a lot of the same people covering this team for quite some time, and then also newcomers, including you, coming and doing it this season, it was just really neat that I could walk outside the hotel lobby where both of us were staying, and there's James Boyd doing his radio show on the terrace, and there's Jeremiah Johnson, and just getting to share that with all the people that have been watching and covering this team through a lot of different eras, and finally getting a really big stage for what has been a Pacer team that's been good over the last 2 years, but hasn't always been seen as being a good team in the public eye, and how it's been reflective. I'm glad I got to do that with everybody, and especially getting to do it with you and you getting to see Indianapolis and experience it with me. I'm going to remember that for a really long time. And I'm also going to remember how many people, especially if you're still listening to this episode 2 days later, came up to tell both of us individually and together how much they appreciated watching it. And I appreciate all of you for watching it. So special thanks to Indiana, and special thanks to the Pacer fans outside of Indiana, and also the Thunder fans that hop in here and say that they appreciate listening to it as well. I think that it's also been kind of a unique NBA Finals in that it seems like both fan bases have a healthy amount of respect and appreciation for the other team as well. And it's almost just yay, basketball. So for my type of coverage, that's been a blessing as well. So thanks to everybody for hanging in with us. And I'll let Samson close it because, to be honest, many of my segues throughout this podcast have been lacking, and I'm hoping that he can finish us out strong here.
Oh, sorry. I was playing solitaire.
Nice.
Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. If you think this work is exemplary, you've been watching it for a while, anything like that, you can actually support us very tangibly by subscribing to Caitlin's Patreon, Basketball She Wrote. I have a piece going up after every single game, which hopefully holds over until the next day when the podcasts come out, and then we get the deep dive stuff that everyone appreciates, that Doris Burke watches every second of. Hello, Doris. And Yeah, thank you for tuning in with us. We appreciate it very much. It helps support us. And yeah, like, comment, subscribe. We rank the Pacers defenders, rank the Thunder defenders. I'd be interested to see that, to get a bit of a public consensus. And just as a last thing, thank Indiana. You people are so kind to me. Like, you guys are really kind to me, and thank you, maybe more than anything, to Caitlin for allowing me to come do this and be part of all this. It's a special place to kind of drop into for this era. It's been unbelievable for me so far, and I have to thank Caitlin for being tremendous in facilitating all this. Thank you for facilitating your ears into your headphones and listening to this, listeners, viewers. Whether you got into this in the morning or at night. From myself and Caitlin, have a blessed day and goodbye.